Hello, great souls. Welcome to our Living Yoga Satsang. Let's begin together with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, and Paramhansa Yogananda ji, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow to you all. Be with us this day as we study this great book, truly a divine scripture. Help us to receive the blessings offered here, to apply the treasure to our own journey, to receive the energy of awakening within us, to take our next step spiritually, and to be channels of light, of blessing and divine love for all. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, so we are reflecting and working with Autobiography of a Yogi, and we are on chapter 22. The title of the chapter is The Heart of a Stone Image. And the chapter begins with a conversation that Yogananda had with his sister Roma. Roma is pleading with him, with Yogananda, to help her husband spiritually, because her husband is very sarcastic and very dismissive of Roma's spiritual life, and he's making jokes, unkind jokes about it, and it's very painful for her. So as I was reading that, and this is just as the very beginning of the chapter, I was aware of how often that happens in the spiritual journey. I've heard from other students, and I certainly experienced it myself, where we are dedicating our lives spiritually. It's feeling so right for us. And in the midst of that dedication and that practice, we can have family members or a partner in your life or people around us who are close enough to us. And I will say, it's been my experience, they don't always have to be close, really intimately close. It could be classmates or coworkers. Really, it could be a stranger. But anyone who is putting down, right, very consciously deriding the spiritual life, mocking it, scoffing at the foolishness of someone who would be dedicated spiritually, and really how hurtful it is. When I started with Ananda, I had attended a workshop. I was actually talking, some of you may know Biraj. Biraj and his wife were leading the workshop, my very first Ananda workshop. And this was in the Midwest. My husband, James, and I lived just outside Chicago at that time. And a woman in Indiana, Cecile Martin, I love Cecile, if you happen to be watching. Hi, Cecile. She led these beautiful retreats, and she'd invite Ananda ministers and teachers to come out and lead programs. Anyways, all these divine things happened for me to receive a flyer in the mail that said this was happening in Kentucky, which was so unusual for Ananda. We didn't have anything in Kentucky, but it wasn't far from where Cecile was. Anyways, I'm mentioning that retreat. I was talking to Biraj. Oh, yes. So I had attended that workshop. And then some months later, I was at the Expanding Light. I knew from that very first workshop, which was in April of '97, that it was strongly recommended to me to take yoga teacher training, which seemed so far outside my box of reality. I couldn't imagine it. But I trusted the divine experience I had on that retreat. I felt the truth of it. And so I trusted the guidance I was received, that was being recommended. And so what was recommended, it was a wonderful way to dive deeply in the teachings, is what they said to me is true. I now lead yoga teacher training, so I really know the truth of that. But I experienced it as a student, the power of it. anyways, I was preparing, and so I'd made a trip out to the Expanding Light just to test the waters, make sure it was a great retreat, but is everyone at Ananda great? Will I have the same experience if I fly out here to California? So, and it's above Nevada City. So I went to the retreat, and I was in a class. And after the class, I was talking, or I had been partnered with Savitri. Some of you may know Savitri Simpson, beautiful soul, senior minister and teacher with Ananda. And she and I were speaking, and she said to me, and I would say she was divinely guided to say it. It's certainly everything I know about Savitri, that would be true. She mentioned something to me I since heard many times, and I've shared with others, which is, when you are developing your spiritual life, it's very important to protect it. And you might imagine, Yogananda had said this, she told me, you might imagine your spiritual life like a young sapling. And that sapling is good to have a protective fence around it, so that as it grows and strengthens spiritually, it's not disturbed and it's not injured. Then in time, that tree is strong. And it can withstand the storms of criticism. It can withstand the storms of others judging your spiritual life. We take it with, it's not as harsh on us, right? Because we're stronger. So I don't remember what I was saying at all that would have prompted her to say that to me. I don't remember consciously feeling at all under attack spiritually. Although the truth is, I had endured a lot of that. So maybe I mentioned it, I don't know. To me, it wasn't something, I'll say it this way, I was used to most people in my world not being as interested in God as I was. So that was just something I was used to, right? I just felt like, yeah, okay. I was always delighted when I met anyone who loved God, and it was one of the things I noticed right away about Ananda, that everyone loved God. And it was so renewing to be in the company of others. That's what I came to understand. Like, I didn't notice how much I actually was vibrationally under the attack of people who were living in worldly consciousness. Not bad people, just they did not see the value of a spiritual life. Not really. And so when she said that to me, I took it to heart. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I could just feel that I was being given a teaching, that I was very individually being given something, that God was speaking through her. That's what I felt. I really did feel that. And I remember the next day at a meal in the dining room, I had an opportunity to be sitting with her, and she just asked how I was doing, and I wanted to tell her that what she had shared with me, it really felt divine. It felt like God was speaking to me through her. And I always remember, I don't quite know how to describe it, but she had a response that was a knowing response, but it was very humble. And in essence, I'm sure she said something to the effect of, I'm glad it was helpful. And I was wanting to say, I actually think God spoke through you. And I can say with a fair amount of certainty, knowing Savitri and just knowing this journey, God does speak through us, right? And it's not egoic for us to acknowledge that. In fact, it's important for us to acknowledge that. Swamiji, in one of the talks I was listening to of his, was telling everyone, these talks are recorded on Treasures Along the Path. Since I'm mentioning it, I'll mention that as a resource to you. So I was listening to one of his lectures, and he said it's very important for us to actually take up the responsibility of being a channel of light and being a channel of inspiration. We are called to do that, every one of us. And we shouldn't say, oh, who am I to be an inspiration to someone? Who am I to have God speak through me? God is looking for willing channels. Right? So that divine energy is flowing out all the time, looking for anyone who's willing to share the light. And when we're sharing the light, our own inner light awakens and strengthens. Yogananda said the channel is blessed by that which flows through it. So we are blessed in the experience of bringing and sharing light with others. And light does come through. It does. So when I was saying to Savitri, I actually think God was speaking to me through you. He was speaking to me. I could feel it, and so could she. So could she. And she just, in a beautiful way, I'm glad that was helpful for you. And it took me time to understand what I might call now the Ananda way. It's not unique to Ananda. It's not limited to Ananda, which is a clear understanding. It's a practice, but a clear understanding of being a channel. What does that mean to be a channel? How do we work with that? And I'll take that right into going a little bit further in the chapter here, because Roma, Yogananda's sister, is saying, could you please help my brother? So then Yogananda needs to discern how to do that. Is it the right thing to do? There's another teaching and practice within Ananda about being a channel as divine timing. So not everyone is receptive. So, boy, on the surface, the brother-in-law was completely unreceptive. He was very harshly judging his wife and spirituality. So there's nothing to indicate outwardly that he might be open to divine intercession and divine grace. And to me, this is part of when we're teaching or serving in any way, being in relationship with anyone, if, part of the practice of being a channel, of sharing teachings, sharing light, is discerning someone's receptivity. And it is interesting, I will say, to note that sometimes people appear very unreceptive, but they aren't. And other times they appear receptive, but they aren't. So, it takes a sense of, I would say, definitely practice and a deep listening. Tread with awareness, right? Test it out, offer a little and see. I'm reminded in this moment, an extraordinary experience I had as a teenager, right, 19. I had an experience where I was with someone I didn't know at all. I was with a girlfriend I did know, and then we were with two other people she brought. The four of us were going to spend an evening together, and this young man was dressed, of the two men, young guys, he was dressed in a way that was dark black leather, chains. I don't remember if he had tattoos. Tattoos weren't as popular then. And that doesn't mean that someone's menacing if they have tattoos, are not at all like that. But anyway, he just had this way of moving through the world with a toughness, right? That was his persona, was a toughness. And he actually, as we were together, he threw something at a house we were walking by, and it was so upsetting to me. And something happened in that moment where I just feel like on a soul level, divine grace took over. And I challenged him, really called him on the carpet about it, but not just the behavior. I really said, you are off course. You are off course. And I don't know what led you to this point and why you're doing what you're doing, but it's not who you are, and you are in danger of losing who you are. And this is very, very serious. I mean, I spoke with such a level of authority that even today it's shocking to me. But it was just there, it was just happening. He was shocked, certainly. Who is this? And I think he said, who's this chick? Like, who is this who's saying this? His friend, surprisingly, said to him, listen to her, man. I didn't know his friend at all. But his friend, and I looked at his friend, I looked back at him, I said, he's a good friend. He's a good friend, he'll support you. Change your ways, right now, change your ways. And I said, I don't know what you need to do to change those ways. You might consider moving. I can't believe I said these things. But that's God. That's how God can move through us if we're a willing channel. Anyways, it was a serious moment of discourse. I said these things to him. I was as serious as I could be. And then there was this moment It was powerful grace, and we all four stood there, and I then said something to the effect of, I've said everything I need to say, and we should go now. Evening over, like we weren't going to do whatever we were going to do. They just looked at me, and I know he could feel from me a friend, one divine friend to another. I don't remember his name, I never saw him again, but I felt God's grace speaking to him. Nothing about him would show that he was receptive to what I had to say, nothing. And somehow he was receptive. And it felt like whatever choice he made, he knew the truth. He knew the truth. So it was his then to make that choice. My friend and I then left, right? We left, we went home. And I afterwards had an experience of that. Yeah, I would say because I was younger and these kinds of things. Anyways, I felt it's kind of like just almost what just happened, what did I say? But I could still feel the rightness of it then too. And part of this journey of being a channel and discerning is that to what Swamiji said to me one time. I had one interaction, personal conversation with him. I'd reached out for support. And one of the messages, primary messages he was sharing with me is how normal the spiritual life is. In the worldly consciousness, it isn't, right? Worldly consciousness, that's the strangest event that could possibly happen that I was describing. Worldly consciousness, that's what I mean, is that after the event, I had a little bit of worldly consciousness that was like, what did just happen? But on a spiritual level, I could feel such a stability and grace that I remember just kind of energetically leaning back and resting in and really feeling like I needed to do what I did. I don't know why. And it's okay. I can let it go. And there's great power in that. Because part of that power is being free from our ego, actually. The ego will say, who am I to say something? Who am I to share the light? Right? It's funny to think that that would be egoic, but it is. Like, well, we're all a child of the universe, and why not any one of us step up and share the light as we're called to share it? Right? The other piece of that is... Well, I'll just stay with that for the moment. So being discerning, being willing to be unliked, which is very hard on the ego. This ego just feels like my security is in popularity. Right? That's how I'm going to be okay, is if I have a lot of people liking me. We cannot control that. We can't control a lot of people liking us. And sometimes it gets us in trouble trying to get people to like us. We do things and we think, ooh, that doesn't feel good. But even if someone's now liking me, I don't feel very good because I'm not being me, right? So the greatest power of soul power is to transform ego consciousness that would feel dependent upon the world going a certain way. And going back to this idea of protecting our spiritual life, we are protecting our own awakening. Right? And then recognizing we're not alone in the journey. So there are others, I can say, it's been my experience, who are divine angels in our life, right? They show up at unexpected times, and there was Savitri. I had put myself in the path of grace by going to Ananda, but then I was able to receive really the presence of God in another person, which was reassuring and also strengthening and very practical in the information I received. So Yogananda is talking with Roma. He has an experience. They go to this temple. He says to his sister, let's go visit this temple tomorrow. Don't tell your husband, that we have anything in mind here in terms of his transformation. Let's just go. And by putting him in the spiritual vibrations, he may, in fact, receive the grace of that temple, of what is there at the temple. And this, again, is a teaching of yoga. Put yourself in the path of grace. Put yourself in situations, put ourselves where we are likely to be supported in our highest aspirations. It's one of the number one reasons I live in spiritual community with Ananda, is to live in vibration. So that when my ordinary life is going about, I'm emptying trash, recycling, washing dishes, whatever I'm doing, I'm living in a community that's dedicated, many of the people who live there, dedicated to a spiritual life. In our community, people also live there who aren't necessarily on a spiritual path. So it's run by Ananda. Many people of Ananda live there, but it's open to anyone. One of our managers said, people self-select. They feel it and they go, oh, I'd like to be here. It's not for necessarily a spiritual reason, but the vibration, it's a very high vibration. So I put myself as part of the practice. We put ourselves in the path of grace. So they go to this temple, lovely story about Yogananda's experience there. He was aware of Ramakrishna having a profound divine experience at this temple with goddess Kali, and she actually comes out of the stone sculpture and comes alive. Yogananda requested the same thing, and eventually actually has that experience as well. His brother-in-law, very derisive, the whole way there, skeptical, angry, even says, I bet you're trying to reform me. Yogananda doesn't respond to that at all. But the brother-in-law said, you must take care of our food. And Yogananda said, Divine Mother will take care of the food, and goes off and meditates. And there's a miraculous experience that is demonstrated. Now, Yogananda, in the chapter, actually, he has an experience with Kali, Divine Mother, appearing, a beautiful experience, and then also super conscious experience. So it's worth reading. All of it's worth reading, but I'm just going to tell you that. It's a beautiful description of spiritual awakening, a touch of that. And he asks for assistance in transforming the consciousness of his brother-in-law. And Divine Mother says, your wish is granted. So I'm going to say he intuited the rightness of it. That's just what I'm going to say. And so he felt it was the right thing to ask for that. And certainly in support of his sister, but he must have also felt that for his brother-in-law. And so then he comes out of the meditation. The brother-in-law is furious with him because he didn't take care of the food. It's 1 o'clock, it's hot, he's starving. And Yogananda says, Divine Mother will take care of us. Brother-in-law, how can this even be possible? You're saying this still. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a monk comes up and says, I noticed you, to Yogananda, I noticed you. I noticed your beautiful meditation. And I felt guided to put food aside for you and your party. Even though we're not supposed to do that, I made an exception for you. We're supposed to be asked to do that and not do it if we're not asked. And to me, it's also very sweetly, I've had this experience, and you may have too, where someone helps you and they don't know why. They don't know why. They feel guided. I don't know why. As we said, I just felt guided to do this. It's an earlier story of Yogananda, 2 penniless boys in Vrindavan, and each way that they're helped, the person says, I felt guided to help you. It's really beautiful. And I would say for part of the practice, because sometimes we just really are channels, we don't know why we're being a channel. Right? I don't know if you've had that experience where you'll say, I don't know why I'm saying this. I've had people say that to me. And I've known in the moment they were saying it, and I have felt and sometimes told them, I know why. I know why. Because God is speaking through them to me. Right? The very thing they're saying, God would say to me, and I can feel it. And maybe God had been saying to me and was saying to me again through them. But I find it very sweet, that experience where I watch someone who will say, and sometimes like me with that young man later, you start to come back to worldly consciousness a bit and you don't know why you did what you did. And I've had people say, I don't know why I said that to you. I could feel it. I feel like, and I've told them, well, I really feel the divine was speaking through you. I think you were being a channel for me, and I appreciate it. I appreciate that gift. So part of, and then in the story here in the chapter, the brother-in-law is transformed, which is, it just feels, it's worth noting. It can happen. I learned that in 12 steps. I saw that so many times where I would encounter someone who you would think couldn't possibly change, and their life would transform because they were receptive to that flow of grace, and they kept putting themselves in the path of grace, and their lives transformed. And that's true of me too, of 12 steps. Recovery from alcohol, drug addiction, right? Like that's true. It was a surprising experience in my life. Never imagined that would be something I would go through. But I did. And 12 steps helped me, being a pathway of deep spiritual teaching, right? Very universal, no definition of what the divine is, but spiritual practices that are, and they're not based in Patanjali, but they match what Patanjali said. Patanjali is great teacher of scripture, of yoga, of the Yoga Sutras, and the yamas and niyamas within them. I'm sure I've talked about these already a little bit because yoga is based on that. And Patanjali said that the path of awakening is universal for every spiritual path. You will go through these phases, you will go through these practices, you will experience realization in these areas. Every true teaching will, whatever the specific details of the teaching are. And that's very true within the 12 steps. And later when yoga came into my life, I saw how lined up that was. Wow, those are the same teachings. And Yogananda said, truth is universal. So this brother-in-law transformed, his consciousness transformed, his life transformed. And I feel it's just very helpful for me in my own journey of awakening to hold that promise that, self-realization, the realization of our divine self is a promise to every one of us. That is our destiny, is what Yogananda said. So holding that it in fact is possible for each one of us to continue to awaken and completely, ultimately awaken, that is within us. And then to hold that promise for everyone. I find it just a beautiful way to move through life, to never allow my consciousness to be discouraged by anyone's outward behavior, to never feel that they are forever frozen anywhere that they are. It's not who they are anyway, our behavior. Right? We are all divine souls on our own journey of awakening, and part of the practice for each one of us, especially certainly those dedicated to awakening spiritually, how can I be of service? How can I help? How can I share? Tell me when to speak and when to be silent. So I offer that for you. I feel like that's the treasure of this particular chapter, to be a channel of light, to be discerning this week in your journey, and just feel yourself in relationship with God, asking that question in each interaction. How can I share the light, and what's the best way to share it? Sometimes through silent presence, a smile, it's enough. Other times through a lot of words, it's okay. So that's all I have for today, dear friends. Good to be with you. Wishing you many blessings today and in this week.